we talked about vaccines. And I told you a little bit of the history of vaccines. Vaccines have solved, well, mostly solved. The only reason it hasn't solved completely is because not everyone's taken the vaccine. Polio, smallpox, mumps. I don't know how to spell mumps, something like that. There's probably 2 M's in there somewhere. So vaccines have rubella. I can go down the list. When you were a baby, your parents probably got you vaccines. The doctor said we're going to give them their MMRs: measles, mumps, and rubella. Smallpox, measles, mumps, and rubella. And I don't know how to spell rubella either. Something like that. And so in any case, these diseases were mostly controlled because of vaccines. We almost got rid of polio. Again, small populations like the Amish in America did not get vaccinated, so polio stayed. Polio is a fecal oral disease, which means it goes from your poop, it goes in the water, and it spreads that way. So it spreads really quickly, especially in places where there's war or bad sewage, right? Bad places where you don't have a lot. I know you grew up in Cleveland where we have a lot of good sewers and a good water district. So you do. If you've ever been anywhere where it didn't, you would know. There are places in the world where there's just a trickle of water going down the street. People poo right on the side of the road. There's no bathrooms. In India, one of the biggest problems in India has been women having to go to the restroom in the middle of the night. They have to go into the woods. There's no bathroom. In some places in India, in the rural areas in India, it's a big problem for a lot of reasons. Obviously, there's poo in the woods, and that rains, and that gets in the water supply. But also, ladies are vulnerable, right? And there's issues with girls being attacked in India as well, or at least there were. I don't know about now. I don't know if they've solved it. So one of the things the World Health Organization, UN's been trying to do is actually spread bathrooms. Isn't that something we're so used to? We're so absolutely used to that we have bathrooms everywhere we go, right? I don't care where you go, we have a bathroom, but there's a lot of the world doesn't have bathrooms. And so you got to wonder what happens to all that poop and all that pee. That's a big deal. That's disease. That's one of the main, very big spreader of disease. In fact, there was a disease, there was an epidemic. I'm not sure if it was a pandemic, but something called cholera. Have you ever heard of it? No. It was a major killer back in the early 1900s. Cholera is basically bad diarrhea. So bad that you end up pooping and blood. All your water comes out of your body. So you've heard of it?
Yeah, I watched a little documentary. It was like Africa or something.
Yeah, in Africa, but it was in the United States too. There's actually a very good movie called In the Time of Cholera. It's a love story, modern love story about a time back then. A lot of people died in this cholera epidemic. So these have been some of the many. Now, cholera was not solved by vaccines. The interesting solution to cholera was just hydrate. What we had to do is just give people IV bags of saline solution, and then they would wash out cholera is a bacteria, it's not a virus. So both antibiotics and giving people saline solutions, increasing the amount of water in the blood, solved the problem for people with cholera. The problem is people didn't trust people in South America where this it was a big outbreak in the early 1900s. It was everywhere, but the reason was bad sanitation. We call sewers and clean water sanitation. So because of bad sanitation, you had all these issues. And in South America, specifically Brazil, where my wife is from, there was a real problem with doctors not being trusted. And this is it. This is the big one right here. Look, if you're going to allow someone to inject you, to stick a needle in you, what do you have to do first before anything? Trust them. I got to trust you if you're going to stick a needle in me. You're going to cut me open? I have to have trust. If I don't trust you, no way. So let's talk about some bad science and what led to a lot of the problems we see today with vaccines. Oh, I don't know what just happened. So there's a lot of big players in any kind of situation like this when we're talking about vaccines. There's the drug companies. All right. Then you got the government. And then you have the patient. And then you have the doctors. And in doctors, I'm going to say medical professionals because there's a lot of people involved. But you also have the hospital. All right, this is a modern understanding of what's going on. And then you have the researchers. Now, we've been talking about science, obviously, and so we're kind of focused on this part of the puzzle. So the idea would be that you want your patient to trust your doctor. So let's talk a little bit about why there's not a lot of trust among patients and doctors and hospitals. What do drug companies, especially today, but what do any company, what are they mostly concerned with? Yeah, in a way. What are they really concerned with? What are any company concerned with? Money. So their real concern is making money. That's what yes, there's probably a lot of really good intentions there of trying to save lives, yes. And they have to make money. We all have to eat. We all, right? This is the world. We all have to make money, so that's acceptable. But unfortunately, drug companies have the reputation of, and it's well earned, they've earned a reputation of being mostly about the money. Okay, and I can give you examples, and many examples if you'd like. They've actually lost. I should put in drug companies, I'm going to also assume you understand I mean pharmacies as well as the people that make the drugs. All right, so hospitals want to care for patients, but what is it that they need in order to do that? Money. So I'm just going to put just one, you know what, I'll put $2 signs on those. Doctors, obviously they love people, they want to help. They've spent many years in school sacrificing. Why did they sacrifice? And it's a sacrifice. Your friends are going out making money, they're getting jobs, they're partying. What are you doing when you're young? If you want to be a doctor, studying. You're reading your books, you're listening to lectures, you're quizzing each other. You're having fun too. You're going out but not as often as your friends. You're not having as much fun. You're not making as much money early on. Now you're a doctor. Now you're a doctor. Your whole 19s and 20s were spent studying. Now you're 30 or late 20s, early 30s. What do you want? You want what? Have fun. And what do you need to have fun? A job, which gets you money. So I'm going to put $1 there. Researchers. What does it take to do research in all this stuff? What do you have to have in order to collect a vaccine and get people to take the vaccine and have a laboratory technology, which means what? You have to have what to get technology, and which means you need what? Money. I'm going to put $3 signs here. And the government's worried about regulating things, about making sure everybody's safe. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And most of the time they are. Most of the time the government's making sure you're safe. But since the drug companies, they want to have the money, what do they have to do? They have to influence the government. They have to try to mediate or reduce the amount of regulation on them. Do you understand what this regulation means? They have to reduce how much the government controls what they do so that they can make the most amount of money. A good example, just one example, there's many. Insulin. Do you know what insulin is? People diabetic. It's required to live. Do you understand that? People that are insulin-dependent diabetics, if they don't get their insulin, they die. It's cheap to make. It's been made for many, many years. You can even get, but a drug company, CEO of a drug company, who ended up going to jail, by the way, because of other things. He took that insulin and marked it up. He started to make people pay hundreds of dollars a month. Hundreds of dollars a month. Everybody had to pay hundreds of dollars a month. People that people were giving up their food. They were losing their homes so they can get their insulin. He tried to influence government. And government was stopped by the people. The patients also want to influence government. The patients are the people, right? Are you and me? Luckily, the patients and patient advocacy groups won that battle, but there's a lot of battles that we've lost. Do you know other countries pay a lot less for drugs than we do? And people know it. Where do some people go to Mexico? Some people go to Canada. Some people go online to get their medicine. Why do they do that? Less money. Why is it less money in Canada, right, literally across the border, than it is here when it's the same drug company that makes it?
Don't they have free healthcare over there?
They have free healthcare, but the drugs are not free. Why is it less money in Canada? They are part of North America, but they're not part of the United States. But that's true. But what if it's the same drug company, the same drug? Why are Americans paying more?
Government?
Yeah, but that's right. The government's not doing anything about it. But who's influencing the government not to do something about it?
Drug companies?
The drug companies. That makes sense, right? They got to make money. Oh, I forgot a big player in here as well. Health insurance companies. They obviously also want to make money. Everybody wants to make money. I mean, that's not wrong. That's not wrong that they want to make money. The problem is where. Right. It depends on how they do their business. So it's not that it's wrong that they make money. It's wrong. Sometimes they go too far. And that's where government's supposed to come in and regulate them. Say, look, you went too far. You got to do this. But when the drug companies and the health insurance companies, when they influence the government in order to make money, then you get a system that's does the patient feel like Do your parents feel like the government's on their side? So they don't feel like the government's on their side, right? Because they're paying so much money for drugs, they're giving up. Some people literally, I've seen these articles. Some people are eating cat food so that they can afford their drugs. The older you get, look, if I retire, I have to pay $1,000 a month for health insurance. $1,000 a month, that's more than my mortgage. More than my mortgage. $1,000 a month for health insurance. That's not even the drugs. Then even with health insurance, I have to pay more, what they call it a copay, for the drugs. So as adults, one of the big expenses we have is medical care. So we have a lot of issues with this. Now, I'm not saying that nationalized health care is the solution because I don't know. I'm not educated in any of this. I'm just telling you what I see as some of the players and some of the issues that are coming along here. So researchers, doctors are in the middle of all this. They prescribe what? They're supposed to serve the patient, but what do drug companies do with doctors? Because when a doctor has a choice of 5 drug companies, 5 different drugs, and you want that doctor to pick your drug, what does the drug company do? How's it going, Megan? You all right? What does the drug company do? They give the doctors some kickbacks. They give them, they send them to Hawaii. They say, hey, try this drug. They influence them. They're trying to influence doctors as well, and they do influence doctors as well as the government. Now here's this woman or guy who's supposed to be on your side, right? Do you feel like if the doctors are getting money from these drug companies, are you feeling like they're on your side? Hospitals, they need to negotiate with drug companies. They need to negotiate with healthcare insurance. They need to negotiate with with doctors to make sure that they're able to pay their bills, because they have a lot of bills. A hospital has a lot of bills. There's a lot of people that work there, which means they all get paid, right? Nobody works for free. Nurses and orderlies, there's phlebotomists, then there's all the equipment all the technology, electricity, heat, beds, cleaning. There's a lot of cost to a hospital, which requires a lot of people they influence each other. Hospitals influence drug companies influence hospitals, health insurance influences hospitals influence health insurance. Doctors are constantly being influenced by hospitals and the hospital rules. Some hospitals don't take Medicare, some do. Some want, you need with some health insurance, you have to get a referral, some you don't. Some co-pays are 90% of the bill up front. So if you want to get surgery, you have to get this, that, or the other thing. Others aren't. What does a patient feel? What do you feel in the middle of all this? Anything. When it comes to anything with health insurance, you're in the middle, you're experiencing this, you're paying all this money, you know that all this is happening, you see it on the news, you feel it in your pocketbook. What do you feel when you're going to the doctor? And the doctor says, I need to, it doesn't matter what it is, what are you feeling? Stress. You're feeling stress. You're stressed out, and you're really not sure what the right thing is. No one person is giving you the right answer. There's not one organization that says, okay, this is what we think, and this is what we're going to do because we're right. This is what's going to happen. So this is what was been going on. So what's been going on with patients is question marks. That's just the environment that that patients and doctors in hospitals all work in. Now, add on to that history. Let's talk a little bit about trust. They're researchers, which is, again, what we're really focused on. Researchers want to do science. And in science, you need, when you're a scientist, you need a control group, and you need variable groups, and you need logic. So when research, we should start in the very beginning. People like Mendel, you remember Mendel from middle school genetics? The pea plants, dominant, recessive, remember that? Punnett squares, okay. So Mendel worked out the genetics. Darwin talked about evolution. You remember evolution? They talk about it in middle school, Darwin and the Galapagos Islands and all that. Okay, and we'll get into it in a minute. So, in a week probably. So here we have researchers who are trying to are in the middle of this time when they're naming things. This guy named Linnaeus. Linnaeus came up with a Latin binomial. Latin binomial nomenclature. Forgive me if I spelled anything wrong. Nomen means name. Nomen and clature is a system, so a system of naming. Latin, and then of course bi means two. So it's a two-name naming system, and it's based in Latin. So for humans, for instance, we're Homo. All right, so Latin binomial nomenclature. With humans, it's Homo sapien. Yeah. No, you can go to the office and get some, or bathroom. If you're going to the office, take the office pass. Bathroom, take the bathroom pass. Homo is the genus. It's a big group, and sapien is the small group called species. Yes, bless you. Have you heard of this, genus and species? Yes, probably. Yes or no? No? Okay, good. No is fine. Yes is fine. I just want to know. Just want some feedback if you've heard about it or not. So its genus is a big name, and we'll get into it. And species is a smaller group. So it's like we're all Americans, but everyone in this room, at least for now, is an Ohioan, right? We can be an Ohioan and be an American citizen, a U.S. citizen. We're also part of the world, right? We're part of North America. We're part of the Western Hemisphere. We're part of the Northern Hemisphere. So we're part of a lot of different groups, are we not? Yes or no, guys? Okay. So we can group things in humans, or any living thing. We can group them into a big group called genus and a small group called species. And they're grouped like this because of characteristics. Well, why are we North Americans? Because that's where we live. Because why are we Americans? Why are we United States citizens? Well, that's where we're born into. What do we share? Clothes and music, right? And food, right? You go to China, you're going to get a different set of foods. You go to Spain, you go to England, you go to wherever, you're going to get different foods, right? It's part of the place you're at. So the characteristics of the place gives you your grouping. All right, so Linnaeus was doing that. He was coming up with this system. And in the middle of that, it was a real big fad. All the scientists were doing it. Everybody was going around trying to name things. They want to name it because you want to discover a species, you want to be able to name it, right? Wouldn't that be cool? I call it the Mendoza plant. The fluorescens Mendoza. Species Mendoza. The genus fluorescens. But they were naming things all over the place, based on Latin binomial names. If you discovered it, you got to name it. That's the rule. So people run around naming it. It's at that point that that bad science gets involved. And by bad science, I mean somebody without any kind of experiments, no control groups, no variables, no tracking, no list of characteristics, no looking at, no in-depth studies, right? Have you ever heard of Jane Goodall and the gorillas? Do you know she spent her whole life with the mountain gorillas of Africa, or chimpanzees? Not her whole life, but many years studying gorillas to try to understand them, getting data, collecting data, and she got, it was a real. If you ever watched the movie, it was a really intense adventure. But she spent a large part of her life studying these things before she could even start to write anything about who they are, what they eat, what their problems are, how gorillas work. This person or group of people did none of that. They did no science, but they called themselves the Royal Academy of Sciences, but they did no real science. They just threw people in categories. They threw them in 4 categories. They threw them in Caucasian, based on the Caucasus Mountains. I think we discussed that was a bad decision, right? Did we discuss why that was a bad decision? They chose the Caucasus Mountains because they thought that the whitest white people would come from the Caucasus Mountains. But that was a mistake. The Caucasus Mountains are in Iran, in between Iran and Russia. Iranians are dark skinned. They're very dark brown. Some have blue eyes, but dark hair. Not white. So that was a mistake on their part. Why? Because they did no research. They didn't study it. They didn't collect data. They have no idea who are the people that live in the Caucasus Mountains. Where did they come from? Who were their ancestors? What culture did they belong to? None of that was studied. Does that make sense? It was bad science. So Caucasian. Another group were, I'm going to put the word black. They used another word. Then there's Asians. Mongoloid. It was bad science. This is where racism started. Well, probably before this, but no, probably it wouldn't be called racism. This is where the races started. Before this, and we're talking the 1600s, there were race wasn't a thing. They just made it up. They made it up. So these didn't exist before the 1600s. Not the 900s, not the times of Christ, not the times before BC, not the times of the Egyptian pyramids. No, race started in the 1600s when people started naming. They needed to put people in groups. These were the 3 groups. You were either Caucasian, black, or Mongoloid. Why Mongoloid? Because of the Mongols. The Mongols. Isn't that crazy? And I don't remember if there was a brown or not. I can't remember if there was a Hispanic. There was no Hispanic.
Did racism exist before that?
There was probably bias. What people, before this time, what people would say, oh, you're French? Oh, you're British? Oh, you're Chinese? Oh, you're from Africa? Oh. But they wouldn't say race because the race didn't exist. And people in each culture were different colors. As I told you, Shakespeare, before this happened, I shouldn't say, it was not 1600s, I'm sorry, the 1700s. In the 1600s, Shakespeare wrote a play where an African, a dark-skinned Moor, was a general of a European army. No, the Moors were real people. They invaded Europe. They controlled southern Spain. They were from Africa. They were Muslim. They controlled the southern Spain for 500 years. No, please don't. Let's not even go there. Don't even say that, please. Don't. It's that people. That was. I'm sure people made fun of people long before race even became a thing. Okay, but I don't know the history of that. I'm only telling you what I know. Okay, so 1700 race then becomes an issue. People were put in one of these three groups incorrectly, and a lot of this was influenced by slavery. So slavery, remember, was in fashion back then before. So we're talking about Revolutionary War times, right? Slavery also influenced this discussion. It influenced. It influenced the idea of race. And of course, if you're Caucasian, you think that Caucasian was the superior one, right? And that's what they thought. They were superior. Well, that's who we are. We're superior. The British had the British Empire, right? They controlled India. They had all kinds of names for people in India. All kinds of bad names. And all they did is the British admit this. They're ashamed of a lot of British people are ashamed of what happened during the imperialist years of the British Empire. They controlled and took all the riches of India and controlled it for a long time. So this racism, did bad ideas and bad actions happen before racism? Yes. But racism, just this idea of race, was using bad science. So fast forward after slavery ends, after the Civil War, we have a period of time in America called eugenics. Still all from this really, all starting and being influenced by this really horrible, bad science that was influenced by slavery, that was influenced by ignorance, that was influenced by doing bad science. So eugenics. To think about eugenics, you have to think about all the different times in history we've tried to do these things. Have you ever heard of Dracula? This is Halloween time, so it's a good time to discuss this. Did you know that the person who... Do you know the history of that name Dracula? Dracula was a real prince. Can we put the stools down? And he was really a prince that and I think by the time I tell you where he came from and what happened, I think you'll understand why they thought of him as a vampire. All right? Dracula, he wasn't called Dracula, he was called Vlad. In fact, he was named Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler. Eventually, they thought Dracula with fangs. You'll see why in a minute. He was a prince. The Moors, the Ottoman Empire, led to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire controlled from what is now Turkey, what used to be called, the Ottoman Empire. But Turkey used to be the home, Istanbul is called Istanbul now, but it used to be Constantinople. And it all used to be part of the Holy Roman Empire, but then it became the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was coming into Eastern Europe in a place called Transylvania, and they were coming down to control Transylvania. He was a small prince in charge of a small country. He had troops, but not a lot. He had a lot of enemies, and there was a lot of crime. because they were poor, they weren't that rich a country. So he took care of all the problems at once. This was his solution. He invited all his enemies over to dinner. He killed them. He stuck a stake through their body, out their mouth, you can imagine where it went in, and put them on the side of the road. He took a stake, a long stake. Remember vampires, stakes, blood, a pole. It was a pole. And it stuck them up so that people were standing there on the side of the road with his through their mouth.
Also their butt?
Yes, out through their mouth, all impaled, stuck.
So was they allowed to be
I don't know. I don't want to know. There's some things I don't want to know. And they stuck him up by the side of the road. So there's this road with all his enemies impaled. That's why they called him Vlad the Impaler. On the side of the road. The impaling means sticking something through you. Hold on, we're not done. Listen. So then he took all the criminals. Anybody that was a criminal, anybody who's poor, anybody who's homeless, did the same thing. By the time he was done, there was roads leading towards where the Ottoman Empire was sending their army. The army was like, we need our taxes, and he was said, we're not going to pay your taxes. And so they sent an army. The army got to the road with all those bodies. They said, oh no, the devil's there. And they turned around and went right back. It only lasted a little bit. They ended up losing anyways. The Ottoman Empire still won. But he survived, but it was a long story. But you can imagine how much blood was yielded from that. So you can think why they called him like a bloodsucker, and the whole idea, the whole thing with stake through the heart, right? And all that comes from the actual history of this guy named Vlad the Impaler. And the evil, the devil, the deals with the devil. Like you can imagine something like that would be kind of evil. Do you agree? So you can see where all that comes from now. It's Halloween season when you look at some of the history. And by the way, that's why I love history. History is amazing to hear these stories. You can find out a lot about who we are today. Look at just Halloween and Dracula and vampires. You can look at the history of where it comes from. So eugenics. Fast forward now, that was like in the 1400s or something like that, or 1500s. Now, eugenics was in 1900s. 1900s, we have there's a lot of people with Down syndrome and other. Do you know what we used to do with people that had mental disabilities? Do you know what we did with them? No. Today we have special ed units. We try to I'll give them the least restrictive environment. We give them homes and support. Do you know what we used to do with people in America that were like that? Put them in the attic.
What?
You hide them. You had to hide Flowers in the Attic. You ever hear that book? Flowers in the Attic. It's a really good book. No, the flowers were kids. They were supposed to be like, they put the kids in the attic. You hide them. So if I have 3 daughters and I have one son or one daughter who's mentally disabled, I got to hide them. Because is anybody going to marry my daughter if they know I have a mentally challenged? They didn't know. They didn't understand anything. They only understood bad science. Is that clear? That's the problem, is bad science. I'm not suggesting this was a good idea. I'm just telling you what they did. They did it because they were ashamed of this kid, because this kid came out this way. People thought we're cursed. People thought there's an evil, some ancestor did something evil that, is coming on to us now. And you didn't want to let anybody know that this ran in your family, because if they knew, then your daughters wouldn't be able to get married. And nobody with money would want to marry your daughter or your son. So this was part of what was going on. Now, modern science, quote unquote science, again, bad science, right? They started to do eugenics and they said, well, look, this is the founding of Parent Plannedhood. Anyways, I forget what it's called, but whatever it is. Here's the problem. We have a lot of girls having babies without husbands.
So single.
But remember, back then, girls couldn't get jobs. They couldn't work.
So single.
So single mothers without an ability to make money. You could clean, but how are you going to clean with a baby? There's no daycare. So how's that going to happen? Well, there was a lot of problems. You know what that led to? I'm not going to go into it, but let's just say there was a lot of bad things that happened because of it. So there's a lot of poverty, disease, and then the mentally challenged. So the solution was breed them out. Obviously, if you're poor, it's your fault. In fact, it's your family's fault. You have a weakness.
Are you talking about like back then?
Back then, yes, of course. Of course, I'm talking about back then. Yes, of course. Yeah, please, not now. So, back then, I should put back then. This was the philosophy back then. If you're poor, it's your fault. So we got to get this. We got to end this cycle of poverty. How do we get rid of these poor people? And we got these mentally ill. And then we're not just talking about learning disabled. We're talking about any kind of mental illness or learning disability. It's your fault. It's your family's fault. What about crime, criminals? It's your fault. What about single moms? It's not always their fault. In fact, a lot of times it wasn't. Remember, sex isn't always a choice, right? But it's their fault. So their idea was, so it's all your fault. How do we solve it? Don't anybody pack anything up. Wait a minute. Don't pack up. I'm almost done. I'm almost done for today. Trust me, there is a point to all this. Just, you have to go with me. So all this is your fault. What is the grand solution to all these problems? What is the grand solution to all this? Oh, what am I doing? The grand solution is, are you ready? Does anybody guess? Can anybody guess?
Read them out.
That's right, but how? Sterilize the women. So they went to girls, poor girls, girls of criminal families, any mental illness. If you had a mental illness, they didn't ask you. They said, here's a truck, here's the hospital truck. From the hospital, right? Let's go back for a second. From the hospital, before you put away, think about this. I'm going to give you something to think about. You don't even have to do any homework. I'm asking you to just think. So you have to listen to think first. Are you ready? Yeah. These patients went trustingly to the doctor and the nurse. The doctor and the nurse did their procedures and then gave them a shot or did a surgical procedure so that they could never have babies again. They got sterilized. So they're saying, here's a vitamin shot. It's going to help you. Soon, people found out years later, this happened to Native Americans, this happened to African Americans, this happened to poor Appalachian people, the people of the mountain folk of West Virginia and Tennessee, Hispanics in Puerto Rico. This happened. They had trucks that would go along the road, stop in your neighborhood, vitamin shots, and they'd shoot you and sterilize you. We inject a sterilization. Remember that for tomorrow's discussion. This is by the government through the hospitals with the help of doctors. Are you hearing that?
Yeah.